Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. Sorry if this month's video is a little disorganized. It's been another one of those stressful months where everything seems to happen at once, so when that happens, I tend towards making videos on the lighter side. The thing that inspired me this month basically reflects a trend I have seen for a long time now in the mental health fields, to absolutely no one's surprise at this point. Whenever we encounter something that purports to be about imparting some form of cultural competency, it unfortunately rarely seems to focus on any of the actual competency part. No, it always seems to wind up as more of a cultural struggle session more than anything else. So, what is the thing that got me going this time around? Well, I saw someone advertising a training for mental health workers that was meant to be about the Black experience. Now, to make this training look attractive to those with interest in the subject, did this individual share some insightful and informational posts talking about theirs and others' experiences as Black individuals? Nope, they sure didn't. Allow me to quote what was posted instead. When I think about our future as Black people, I want us to name our children names that are even harder for the dominant Western culture to pronounce. Oh, and let's not forget a classic like be aware of white centering, tears, denial, innocence, defensiveness, and apathy. Now, full disclosure, I did not pay to attend this training, and so I did not see anything beyond the sample slides they posted in the group. But let me tell you, what I saw did not exactly inspire me to want to spend my hard earned cash. In response to that first post in particular, I wanted to write a reply that said simply, as a therapist, what is the clinical value of these statements? But based on the second post, I had a sneaking suspicion that my rather straightforward question would simply be dismissed as an example of white defensiveness, and opted not to bother with that. Instead, I decided to come and make a video about it here because, as I mentioned, this is hardly the first example of this kind of thing I have seen in trainings like this. So, let's start specific and go broad. I legitimately would like to ask, with statements like these, what is it that you're trying to teach people who are attending your lecture? That Black people deserve to have their own identity? I mean, I don't think that anyone is disputing that fact. However, I do have to admit, I wonder how framing your identity in the sense of being in opposition to the dominant Western culture is serving you. For the sake of argument, let's say the author of this webinar decided to name their child something that can only be pronounced in guttural throat clicks or something to similar effect. They're doing this to prove what point? To achieve what end? Other than having everyone struggle to know how to refer to their child, to have people try to shorten or abbreviate their name, to have the child with the actual name become frustrated that no one can pronounce it and spend a lot of time having to correct others, or eventually just giving up and going by something else instead. For goodness sakes, stories of children struggling with unique names are a dime a dozen, so even just the original point is going to accomplish little other than a self-fulfilling prophecy of causing that child to feel othered in society before we even get to racial issues. So it really just feels like cutting off your nose to spite your face. Beyond that, again, I understand a need to carve out an identity for yourself. But I really wonder about the drive to do so by making things more difficult for others. Is that really the direction you want to take? Now, let's call a spade and acknowledge this as the obvious chest thumping, sticking it to the man idea that it is. That sort of attitude might seem appropriate for a school rally or political gathering, but this was meant to be a training webinar for mental health practitioners. And so I ask again, what is the clinical value in bringing this kind of commentary or attitude to such a training? What am I meant to gain from this sort of thing as a therapist to be able to step into a room with a Black individual and be better poised to help them? I'm sorry, and maybe this is just my white perspective, but I just don't see it. What I see is someone trying to be divisive in the guise of trying to uplift Black voices. And this is unfortunately a very common strategy in these kinds of things. They very, very often seem to be just as much, if not more, about pointing fingers and sowing blame in others for their struggles as it is about actually talking about the specific problems they face and making specific suggestions on how these problems can be fixed. But there's a problem with this approach. They named it themselves in their own way. The white defensiveness they mentioned. Yeah, when you have a white person that is doing everything in their power to behave in a fair, moral, and egalitarian way through life, and you point the finger and tell them they're part of an oppressive system anyway, you're gonna get people who will become defensive. When you have someone who would never in a million years consider themselves to be a racist, who has done nothing but gone out of their way to be polite and inclusive to people of all stripes, and yet you call them a racist for whatever reasons you deem fit, you're going to get people who will become defensive. When people belong to the same racial group as a historical group that has committed some wrong, and you decide to focus on their shared skin color rather than about the fact that insert historical group here did the wrong thing, yeah, you're going to get people becoming defensive. The problem with this is defensive people generally aren't as open to your message and therefore will probably be less likely to do what you want. There's even more to it than just that, though. Those who often have these little disclaimers about white defensiveness and other such things often act like there's something wrong with these people for becoming defensive, like the issue belongs with them. Naturally, there's no possible way that my perspective could be in any way problematic for causing people who have engaged in no deliberate harmful behavior to feel defensive. There's no reason for me to step outside my bubble to consider what I may be doing wrong in my approach that may be causing people to become defensive. Perish the thought, it's not even worth considering. I think that if we were addressing any topic other than a trait on the intersectionality totem pole, we would marvel at the vanity, the conceitedness of someone acting like they are so far above criticism that they dismiss it outright even prior to sharing their actual views. Yet, in situations like this, these kinds of statements can be thrown around not only with nobody batting an eyelash, but with people actually thanking them for the dismissal and outright disrespect of their viewpoints, just by virtue of belonging to the dominant group. I mean, seriously, guys, I know I've gone over this a dozen times now, but don't make me tap the freaking sign. Anyway, there's a lot more I could say on that topic, but I don't want to stray too far from my original point. The point is, like the original comment about naming your kids unpronounceable names, what is the clinical value in creating a training that people have to pay you to come see that has the potential to elicit defensiveness in your listeners? Or perhaps I should rephrase at this point. Where is the clinical value in taking an aggressive approach like this versus taking an approach of simply teaching, sharing experiences, petitioning humbly for help with a problem you see as being worthwhile, or even on a very base level, providing something that may actually be of use to mental health practitioners who want to work with people belonging to a certain demographic group? I know for an absolute and infuriating fact that my commentary on this matter would likely be perceived as tone policing or missing the point, or, again, to draw from terms used before, white centering, white apathy, white defensiveness, etc. But honestly, that's truly just window dressing in this discussion. The reason I keep bringing up the idea of clinical value is because I believe very strongly in the importance of training people in our profession in ways that will confer the greatest benefit to others. To our clients primarily, of course, but also to our fellow practitioners. I believe that those of us in this field are truly privileged, in the real sense of the word, to be here. We uphold what should be a sacred and thoughtful place, where people often come to share with us their deepest concerns and most closely held secrets. We are trying to help people address and solve their problems. In creating material to support fellow therapists, Whatever message we are trying to confer, we should ideally be doing so in a respectful and solutions oriented manner. If we're focusing on blame and finger pointing, without an equal or greater focus on solving the actual problems we're talking about, we're taking the wrong approach. In the interest of providing an example of something with clinical value, let me offer some training free of charge right here, right now. And I think this one is useful to both therapists and clients alike. Let's envision for a moment that you have someone in front of you who talked with shame about the fact that a relative, let's say a parent, engaged in some terrible behaviors. Let's say they were abusive or engaged in drug use, just as an example. As a therapist, would you A, help that person to process their feelings and remind them that what their parent did is not their fault? Or B, would you hold that person accountable for their parents' actions and balk when they get defensive or ask what they could have possibly done differently? If you answered B, I would first of all question your direction for therapy with that client after making a comment like that. And second of all, I might suggest that you consider entering into a different field because that's pretty insensitive. And if you were a client in this situation, well, let me say what I always say when I encounter these kinds of discussions. And I wish that I could post this in neon lights right here. Don't accept guilt for things you haven't done yourself. You cannot properly atone for actions that others have done. You didn't do the crime, and therefore you should not have to do the time. I think you'll find that those who would try to claim otherwise will generally not be satisfied, even if you do try to take on that responsibility anyway. But life doesn't work like that. Take responsibility for your own actions and do what you can to be a good, decent person, because you are the one person on this earth that you can control. I'm not going to flat out say that those who say otherwise are necessarily trying to get something out of you, but I am going to say that, at minimum, they don't have your best interests at heart. So there you have it. Valuable training that you didn't have to pay for. You're welcome. Now, circling back to the overarching discussion, I want to distinguish blaming and shaming of demographic groups versus blaming and shaming of ideas or ideologies. In my videos, and even in my research advocating for men and their needs, I do often spend some time talking about things like how feminism or other more general societal attitudes resulted in the problem becoming as bad as it has become. However, even in those cases, I do try to spend all that much more time talking about how we can work towards fixing these problems, and even more time actually advocating for men's needs in my community or directly in working with men as a therapist. So, in criticizing the ideas in this video, I speak from a place of experience in how to actually affect positive change and build bridges. If you want to see better outcomes for the groups for which you advocate, maybe instead of taking a divisive, blaming stance, try focusing instead on working together with others to identify meaningful ways of solving problems and creating change. Granted, you might feel a little less morally superior with this approach, but you'll be more likely to actually get things done. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.